Accordion! Not exactly a softball of a topic. Oh, baby. Siouxsie and the Banshees emerged in 1976 as part of the first wave of British punk rock, but the band quickly transcended punk's raw minimalism by adding haunting melodies, experimental textures, and introspective lyrics. They disbanded in 1996, but over the course of 2 decades, the band became one of the most influential forces in alternative music, shaping the post-punk and gothic rock movements and inspiring countless artists, from The Cure and Joy Division to later acts like Depeche Mode and Garbage. Every legacy has a beginning, and for Siouxsie and the Banshees, the early buzz generated by noted DJs like John Peel and early singles like Hong Kong Garden would manifest in the successful release of their debut full-length album, The Scream, in November of 1978. So this album made a big splash in the UK. The opening track, Pure, established a tone of what would certainly follow. I recommend this as a headphone track if this is the first time you've ever experienced it. Jigsaw Feeling, Overground. Methinks Velvet Underground was an influence on this band. Overground was re-recorded a few years later. We'll get to that. Carcass very much sounds like its time. Mirage does too. The Helter Skelter cover adds a whole new vibe to that Beatles tune. Nicotine Stain is probably the closest to a straight-up punk track on the album. Suburban Relapse is a close second. Switch is really haunting and beautiful and weird and beautifully weird. The reissue of the album contained the Hong Kong Garden single, which somehow was left off the debut album. The Staircase was also a single that charted in the UK, and it has a really neat, sinister energy to it. Now here's the thing about The Scream as far as I'm concerned. It was very well received in its time, but in my opinion, it has aged kind of poorly. So I'm still going to say that it's a good album out of respect for what it meant at the time of its release, but it's not a Siouxsie and the Banshees album that I ever revisit, and really, I'm okay not. In 1979, Join Hands was released. It is arguably a starting point where post-punk introduced us to its new sibling, goth rock. Poppy Day is a sweet and simple introduction to the album. I don't really mean sweet. Regal Zone was inspired by the war with Iran that was going on at the time. Icon is a classic track in my opinion. Playground Twist was a charting single from the album and has a cool alto sax riff in it. This is kind of a theatrical track. The Lord's Prayer, it goes on and on. Love and Avoid, super punky vibes, not on the album originally. This is another track that would show up in reissues later on. This album is also good for different reasons than, I don't know where that's going there. Let me try. Oh, that's not where I was trying to put it. That's what I thought. So that's where that goes. So Join Hands goes on the good tier. I think it very much hints at what's to come. John McKay left during the tour. The supporting tour for this album, Kenny Morris, did as well. So that, arguably affected what would happen later as well. Kaleidoscope dropped in 1980. This album peaked in the top 5 in the UK, so they were definitely consistently onto something. I don't like the way these words ever sound coming out of my mouth, but putting a little distance between themselves and punk was a really good decision for this band. More post, less punk, and a couple of new members. I'm not sure there had ever been a song that sounded like Happy House before that, at least not from them. But you could breathe a sigh of relief, goth kids. That song is pure sarcasm. Tenant is a good song. Trophy is a yes from me. Christine was a hit, and it was about a woman with 22 different personalities. It's also one of their best songs. Hybrid kind of meanders, if you ask me. Clockface is all right. Lunar Camel is interesting. Desert Kisses. I kind of feel like Robert Smith got the idea for a lot of Cure songs from this. Red Light is one of their best deep tracks. Paradise Place is above average. Skin feels like a real banger of a closer. Reissues of this album would also add Israel as a bonus track. Not everyone was happy that this album had less noticeable punk vibes and more noticeable electronic vibes, so this album was not necessarily well received by some people, but I think it's their first great album. If for anything, the fact that it maybe had a little bit more of an electronic energy, a little bit more where post-punk was going, if that makes any sense. In 1981, Juju was released, the band's 4th album. Spellbound is an absolute classic. It's a great opener. Into the Light makes it clear that this is more of a guitar album. This album has much more of a sense of momentum to it. Arabian Nights is a strongly psychedelic-flavored post-punk jam. Halloween is fun. Monitor, Night Shift, very, very goth. If Kate Bush was going to do a goth record, it would sound like this. Sin in My Heart, fun with tempo. Headcut, Voodoo Dolly. Feel like songs from their first two albums, but that aged better. Here's the thing about this album. This honestly is their first. This is a great album. It's more great than Kaleidoscope. If I were to tinker around there and slide left and right and kind of sort them out like that. Once Upon a Time, the singles was the first best of collection from the band. They'd put together some previously released singles that weren't on albums up to that point, like Hong Kong Garden, Israel. It's a pretty solid collection. I mean, the thing about best of collections is, what do you say? It's a good collection. I wouldn't say it's necessary. A Kiss in the Dreamhouse dropped in 1982. Why was Cascade not a single? Then it's one of their best deep tracks, in my opinion. It's a great opener. Green Finger is all right. That recorder part works. Obsession is very neo-psychedelia. She's a Carnival has some fun moments. Circle is okay. Melt is genuinely Baroque. Cocoon is kind of post-punk jazz. Slowdive is one of their best songs. Leaning into krautrock was a very good choice for this band. This is another great Siouxsie and the Banshees album. I think it's pretty safe to say they'd hit their stride. In November of 1983, the live album Nocturne dropped. I'm not going to go into any kind of track-by-track breakdown of this album other than to say this album has great energy to it, and it's a really good live album. I'm going to go ahead and say it's a great album, even though I don't normally say that about live albums a lot. Robert Smith was playing guitar while they toured, so it's kind of interesting to see, or to hear, I guess I should say, maybe his sort of spin. His spin on the guitar sound makes you wonder, what if he'd been the guitarist all along? What would Siouxsie and the Banshees have sounded like? Hyaena was released in June of 1984. It was their first album to chart in the United States. Finally, right? This is the only studio album with Robert Smith as a member of the band. Dazzle, when it starts, it tricks you into thinking, did I mistakenly purchase a Leonard Bernstein album or something? But then no, Siouxsie's just dropping a not very subtle hint that this album is going to be their most orchestral release to that point. And yes, that is the London Symphonic Orchestra. We Hunger is one of the more energetic songs on the album. Take Me Back is good. Belladonna hints at some later works like Oh Baby, maybe. Swimming Horses was a single that really tells a story if you're paying attention to the lyrics. It's about an organization that rescues Middle Eastern women who are about to be put to death for their supposed premarital crimes, if you know what I mean. Running Town is quintessential Siouxsie and the Banshees. Pointing Bone sounds a lot like what they've done before, so it's just kind of okay. I mean, it's not bad. Blow the House Down, yes, that's a solid track. So people had mixed feelings about the more orchestral direction of the album. I do think this is a little bit more hit or miss than what had happened before, so I would drop it on the good tier. Still good. Good is good. Look it up. The Thorn EP dropped in October of 1984, just a few months after. This was an EP that featured some reworked versions of previously released tracks. John Valentine Carruthers joined the band as guitarist, so part of that was just to introduce him. I kind of feel like this is just okay. Kind of feel like it's not necessary, and I'll tell you why in a little while. We'll get to that. Tinderbox dropped in April of 1986. This is a very focused, very confident album from Siouxsie and the Banshees. This album just moves. Candyman confidently opens the album. It's a song about child abuse, and Siouxsie sounds noticeably angry in this track, almost like there's a little bit of grit in her teeth here and there. Sweetest Chill and This Unrest, classic post-punk vibes. Cities and Dust. This is my favorite Siouxsie and the Banshees song. This is the song that really helped me discover them at the time. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was cool enough to be a 12-year-old kid listening to, The Scream when it dropped. So I did eventually go backwards with them, just like I did The Cure starting in the mid-'80s. Anyway, Cities and Dust, I think I saw that in 120 minutes one night. It's one of the best alternative songs of the 80s, in my opinion. And it's about Pompeii. Did you know that? You probably. Cannons is also a pretty solid dance rock track. 92 Degrees. Interesting story there. It's based on the idea, supposedly a survey, some sort of research happened that indicated that more murders happened at the temperature of 92 degrees than any other temperature. Below that, people were comfortable and just feeling better mood. Above that, it was just too hot to do anything. But 92 was just the right temperature to make people pissed off. I don't know if it's true or not. That's just the story. Land's End is just the right ending for this album. In my opinion, this is a classic 80s alternative album. I will accept no argument otherwise. That's better than a great album. In March of 1987, Through the Looking Glass. Now, that's a covers album, which was not what I was hoping for, but it's not bad. I think that your opinions on the covers are going to depend on whether or not you like the originals in the first place. So, This Wheel's on Fire. Okay, I'm cool with Dylan. Your Lost Little Girl, Always Loved the Doors, Sea Breezes, Roxy Music, The Passenger, the Iggy Pop classic, Hall of Mirrors. Shit, I just like saying Kraftwerk. It's that thing that happens when you have to follow up a masterpiece. What do you do? How do you do it? So, in my opinion, they sort of decided, let's just do something else and not worry about it. We'll worry about that later. Well, later was 1988 with the release of Peepshow. In my opinion, this album is where the creative juices really started to flow with Siouxsie and the Banshees. And that's saying a lot if you think about it. Peekaboo. Did they ever do a more fun song than this? What else sounds like Peekaboo? Built on a backwards loop of a brass part originally intended for a different song. Pop Matters put it at number 18 of their 100 greatest alternative singles of the 80s list. It was originally going to be a B-side of The Passenger from the previous album, but they realized it was too good. MTV loved it. The song earned a Grammy nomination for Best Alternative Music Performance. Their only one, somehow. Accordion. I don't think you could argue that it was their biggest hit. If not in the UK, everywhere else, so you probably could say it was their biggest hit worldwide. The Killing Jar made it to number 2 on the American Modern Rock chart. Scarecrow's a good song. Burn Up. Cello! But I'm not entirely sure I got the hang of this one. Ornaments of Gold. Cities and Dust meets This Wheel's on Fire, right? The ballad, The Last Beat of My Heart. A lot of people have covered this. When I was listening to this over the weekend and making notes, I thought to myself, man, I could hear Shirley Manson singing this. I could totally hear Garbage doing a cover of this. Rhapsody eases in, stirs up some drama, and then gently fades away. Peepshow is the band's creative peak, in my opinion. It's peak Siouxsie and the Banshees. It's also one of those classic late 80s alternative modern rock records when that was really starting to become a thing. Peepshow is that album. In 1991, while they were busy co-headlining Lollapalooza, they dropped Superstition. Kiss Them For Me is in my top 5 Siouxsie and the Banshees songs. I love that song. Tablas! Come on, people, tabla! This song made it into the top 40 in the United States. MTV was all over it. This song is about Jane Mansfield. She was a popular actress / sex symbol, which is an old-timey term for she was a hot mama, in the 1950s. Fear of the Unknown. I did not like this song at first, but then over time it really grew on me. Somehow, at the time, it struck me as sort of an empty-calorie Siouxsie and the Banshees song. Let's record a song that sounds like us. How much effort do we have to put into this? None. But then somehow, over time, I thought Kiss Them For Me was a brilliant song, and this was just not the song that should have come next, if that makes any sense. Drifter has this sort of gothic western vibe. It's pretty cool. Little Sister is classic melancholy. Shadow Time was a single. It's a pretty blatantly pop, but in a good way. Especially the version that was released as a single had more synthesizers. It was a little catchier. Silly Thing is not my favorite track on the album. Got to Get Up has a cool groove to it. Budgie really makes this work. Silver Waterfalls has Simple Minds vibes to me. It's an alright song. Softly is beautiful. Somehow it's beautiful and it's very immersive. The Ghost in You is a song about Tiananmen Square. So, not exactly a softball of a topic. Face to Face was added on to this eventually on streaming configurations and reissues. It was part of the Batman Returns soundtrack. Some pressings of Superstition have that. Superstition still has a lot of really good moments. It's still a great album, really. Twice Upon a Time, The Singles, was released in 1992. It is a singles collection focusing on later singles, like Peekaboo's on it, Kiss Them For Me, The Killing Jar is on it. It's a good collection, and we'll just leave it at that. And the final Siouxsie and the Banshees studio album, The Rapture, dropped in January of 1995. It was led by the single Oh Baby, first track on the album. I like this song, but somehow I don't know, in a way it feels like Peekaboo Part 2 to me. It's poppy, for sure, and I like it. If it rolls up on one of my playlists, I'm like, oh, baby. Just, quietly, because nobody needs to hear me sing. Stargazer has classic Siouxsie and the Banshees vibes. Fall from Grace, Not Forgotten, Sick Child. It was written by Budgie. I'm not sure what it's about, but if you listen to the lyrics, you can get some ideas. The Lonely One is okay. Falling Down is the first track on this album that doesn't remind me exactly of some other Siouxsie and the Banshees song. The instrumentation on Forever. Thumbs up to this one. Maybe the best song in the album. The title track. Here's everything we've ever recorded before slowed down and mixed into one 11-minute song. I don't know. To me, that song doesn't really go anywhere. The Double Life is dark and brooding, but not entirely memorable. Love Out Me closes the album. Quite a bit of energy and has a Siouxsie and the Banshees throwback vibe to it in a way. So this is a mixture of predictability and eclecticism. I'm not sure I had put those two together exactly. It's still a good album, but it's not one that I am keen to revisit with any frequency, meaning I don't. Although there are good songs on it. In 2002, the compilation The Best of Siouxsie and the Banshees dropped. So basically it's like, and every artist has at least one of these, a greatest hits package that basically literally is their greatest hits. The songs with the most exposure or the songs that got the most play on the radio or sold the most singles or did the best on MTV. And other than leaving off Oh Baby, which it was noticed, these probably are the 15 biggest hits. But I'm just going to be pretty honest with you here. I don't think that In 2002, the band got back together for a brief US-UK tour, and from that, they compiled the 7-year Itch Live. This is from performances in London. It's a 14-track CD, a 2-LP vinyl release. The DVD featured 17 tracks. Cities and Dust was done on the album. It was only on the DVD. I think this is okay. I think Nocturne is better. It's just a better live album. So in 2004, the Downside Up box set was released, a 4-disc set. B-sides, unreleased tracks. The Thorn EP was brought back and incorporated into this collection, so that was a good way to get that. Eve White, Eve Black, I can see why that, or I can hear why that wasn't an album cut. That's kind of out there. She Cracked is good. El Dia de los Muertos, the B-side of Last Beat of My Heart. Isn't that interesting that's two very, very different songs. I always recommend Cure fans getting Join the Dots because there's a lot of interesting stuff on. I'm also going to recommend Siouxsie and the Banshees fans get this. I'm not sure it's great, but it is definitely at least good. In 2009, at the BBC, 3-disc set, a lot of John Peel session stuff. He loved the band. He really helped put them on the map. He had a massive cult following by the mid-70s, late 70s in the UK. If you're from the UK, you're like, oh no. Also performances at the Apollo in Oxford at Royal Albert Hall. This is a real treasure trove of live performances, maybe. I would still say Nocturne is the best live album. Just let me have that. And finally, in 2022, the vinyl-only release, All Souls, was released on black vinyl. There was a limited edition orange vinyl pressing. These 10 tracks were selected by Siouxsie Sioux to celebrate the autumn equinox and its festivities. Every song is either about the occult or death. That's essentially the unifying theme here. Spellbound had recently been used in Stranger Things, the popular Netflix show. So I think they were maybe hoping to generate some interest in Siouxsie and the Banshees, because the same thing had happened with Kate Bush, with Running Up That Hill. So there's, potentially a new audience there. Like I said, it's 10 tracks. There are no remixes, no remasters. It's just a neat little collection. If you're a vinyl collector and you're really into all things Siouxsie and the Banshees, you might want to put that in there. So that is how the Siouxsie and the Banshees discography stacks up for me. Feel free to agree and disagree. Anyway, there's another tier list video up here if you want to move along and check that out. If you have any suggestions for a future tier list, do let me know. I did this one because it was suggested. And thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.